Many of you know, but many of you may not know, Sandra is a remarkable researcher in her own right. And it's a huge passion of hers as well. Some of you may or you may not remember growing up in Calgary and having some awareness of the work that our Jewish community did around freeing Soviet Jewry. I had some vague memories of it, but not a whole lot. Sandra and I were speaking on the phone the other night, and we talked a little bit about it. And she said, well, you know, I remember when I was younger, I read Elie Wiesel's book on Jews of Silence. Did you read it, Laura? I said, no, I didn't. And more she dug, she even found information about her own father and how heavily he was involved in events, fundraisers, and heading committees to focus on freeing Soviet Jewry, and she didn't realize how heavily he was involved. So it was amazing that one simple article came upon her desk that served as a genesis to help her get into this topic. And I personally thank you for doing this, because you know what? I don't know a whole lot about the plight of Soviet Jewry. I know a little bit about it, and maybe there are others like me who don't have a whole lot of information from the 70s and 80s. So here you are, 50 years later, Sandra, and you're going to help us with that by giving us a retrospective of just how our Jewish community in Calgary stepped to the plate. And I'm glad you are also going to continue to poke around about this topic, so we can look at some of the people who can still speak about their experiences after this program, because their stories definitely do need to be preserved. I hope you all agree. Sandra, please.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much to Laura for chairing tonight's meeting and for your great introduction. Before I begin the presentation, I just want to express my thanks to all the volunteers who work so hard for our organization. We really are a group that we're volunteer led, and we have a few staff that do a fantastic job, but we depend so heavily on all our volunteers as well as our donors, and I just want to thank everyone for all their contributions. Tonight, I am pleased to present a snapshot of the local efforts in supporting the Free Soviet Jewry movement of the 70s and 80s. This information has been gathered through examination of old issues of local Jewish newspapers and organizational documents held by the Jewish Historical Society of Southern Alberta. Through searches of digital versions of the Calgary Herald archive provided by the Calgary Public Library, and through stories shared by participants in this movement. And I should point out, as Laura noted, I do hope to continue with this and write an article for Discovery at some point in the future. So I have had a chance only to gather a few stories, and I encourage anyone who has stories to tell about their contributions to please contact me. Soviet immigrant Isabella Tabarovsky, in a 2019 opinion piece in the Jewish Telegraphic Agency entitled "The Liberation Fight for Soviet Jews Was a Miracle Most of Us Didn't Know About," describes the fight for Soviet Jewry as, quote, "a glorious episode in the history of North American and global Jewish history. It's a story we could do well to remember," unquote. The campaign to free Soviet Jewry was a 2-decade initiative that has receded into history. In this presentation, I pay tribute to the activities of the Calgary Jewish community in this tremendously successful international social action campaign that eventually saw over 1.5 million Jews finally freely allowed to leave the Soviet Union. In the 60s, 3 million Jews, 1/4 of the total worldwide Jewish population, lived in the Soviet Union. Since 1924, when Stalin became the leader, synagogues and Jewish schools had been closed, Hebrew and Yiddish publications were banned. Little was heard from the Jews of the Soviet Union. Inspired by Premier Kosygин's 1966 statement that the Soviet Union would allow citizens to leave in order to join family living outside the country, and Israel's victory during the Six-Day War in 1967, a number of Soviet Jews applied for immigration visas to Israel. While a few were successful, many had their applications denied, and they became known as refuseniks. Refuseniks faced a number of challenges. Anna Gelt, in her oral history, notes that once she and her husband applied to leave the Soviet Union in 1975, they both lost their jobs. They were considered as betraying their country by applying. They also lost their homes rented through the government and had to move in with their parents. Refuseniks also experienced random searches of their apartments. Jewish books or religious texts were confiscated, and telephones were often disconnected. Some were arrested and sent to prison, labor camps, the Gulag system, or exiled to Siberia. Soviet Jews who wanted to learn about Judaism, practice Jewish rituals, and study Hebrew did so in secret and at great risk to themselves. Refuseniks who were jailed were also called prisoners of Zion. Prisoners of conscience is a broader label and includes those jailed simply for expressing political or religious beliefs or imprisoned solely because of who they are. As worldwide Jewry became aware of the Soviet Jews' struggle to leave, and inspired by Elie Wiesel's 1966 book, Jews of Silence, Jewish individuals and organizations began a 2-decade campaign of social awareness, social action, and quiet diplomacy. Cantor Rabbi Solomon, a member of the Jewish rock group Safam, was inspired by the plight of the refuseniks to compose the song Leaving Mother Russia in the late 1970s. This song became an anthem for the Soviet Jewry movement and was performed by Safam at protest rallies in the States. Sorry, I'm just trying to bring up the music here. As a number of you may be aware, one of the group members is a fellow Albertan, Joel Sussman from Edmonton. And I'm just going to play a very short clip. I'm playing it through my iPad, so the sound is not as great as it should be, but you'll get the sense of it. And the link to their website is on the slide. I encourage you to check out their music on their website.
They call me Anatole, in prison I do lie. My little window looks out on a Russian sky. I've been arrested here for crimes they have not named. Let all my people know the charge will be a frame. See my accuser standing in the hall. He points his finger at us all. You now must pay the penalty for the crime of daring to be free. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited us will be gone.
Great music. I do encourage you to check out their website. Well, in 1966, the Canadian Jewish Congress had held a conference on Soviet Jewry with the former Prime Minister John Diefenbaker as the key speaker. It was the news in June 1970 of the arrest of 16 Soviet activists who were planning to steal an airplane in a desperate attempt to fly to freedom that really woke up the Jews in the West to the need to help their brethren in the Soviet Union. When Soviet Premier Kosygin visited Canada, there were Jewish protesters during every minute of Kosygin 8-day visit. Starting in the early 70s, Jews from all walks of life began writing press releases, painting signs and banners, attending rallies, sending letters and telegrams and petitions, etc., in an attempt to harness the power of media to educate the wider Canadian community about the situation for Soviet Jews, to provide support to Soviet Jewry, and to pressure the Soviet government into letting the Jews leave. This major human rights movement was supported by many in the non-Jewish community. It became a major theme that lasted until 1989, when the USSR opened the Iron Curtain to Jewish immigration. In 1970, the Canadian Jewish Congress is asking Jewish Canadians to include a fourth piece of matzah and a special prayer for the liberation of Soviet Jews during the Passover Seder. I remember my father, Harry Sherman of blessed memory, including a fourth matzah and reciting this prayer at our family Seders. The March 1974 issue of Calgary Jewish News includes a plea to readers to purchase the Soviet Jewry themed Haggadah, Let My People Go, to mail Passover cards to refuseniks, and to set a place at the Seder table to acknowledge the plight of Soviet Jews. This major focus in freeing Soviet Jewry is reflected in reports in the annual publication American Jewish Yearbook. From 1968 to 1972, for 24 years, the report for Canada annually included a section on Soviet Jewry. In addition to the petitions and rallies and letter writing, a number of Canadians traveled to Russia, smuggling in contraband such as Levi jeans and Jewish prayer books. Last May, CBC Radio in its tapestry section featured the story of how Sherry Basson, the assistant coach and GM of Canada's junior national hockey team, smuggled prayer books and Talaisim into the Soviet Union when he went with his team to the 1983 championship in St. Petersburg. Team players and coaches, all non-Jewish, supported his plan and agreed to keep it a secret. On the political level, Canadian Jewish Congress was also involved in quiet diplomacy on behalf of Soviet Jewry. Flora MacDonald and other politicians participated in the Canadian Parliamentary Group for Soviet Jewry, formed in 1980 at the request of Canadian Jewish Congress. It was comprised of 283 individuals fighting for refuseniks through diplomatic channels. Flora MacDonald, the first female foreign minister, was in government from 1972 to 1988 and played a key role in advocating on behalf of Soviet Jewry. I had the good fortune to be on a committee with this amazing woman and was at her 80th birthday celebration at Parliament Hill in 2006. On the local level, in 1982, Honorable John Thompson, MP for Calgary South, acting upon letters he had received, recommended intervention by the Canadian government on behalf of Anatoly Sharansky. In 1982, the Parliament did pass a motion to urge the Soviet Union to free Sharansky. Calgary community appears to have first begun its Soviet Jewry advocacy in 1970, with initial efforts spearheaded by the Calgary youth. In the early part of the 70s, Jewish Community Council partnered with other organizations in the support of Soviet Jewry. News reports I have located indicated that at least by 1974, Council had established a subcommittee to lead community activity in this area, the Calgary Committee for Soviet Jewry. Local activities were also organized by Calgary Jewish women's organizations such as Hadassah Witzo, National Council of Jewish Women, and Synagogue Sisterhoods, as well as Jewish youth groups and B'nai B'rith. In addition, synagogues collaborated in initiatives and highlighted the plight of Soviet Jewry to their congregations. One example is the 1977 commemoration of 24 Jewish intellectuals and artists murdered under Stalin, when both Rabbi Louis Schechter of the Beth Israel and Rabbi Louis Tuckman of the Sheretz Tzedek spoke to their congregants about Soviet Jewry. A Calgary Jewish Star news report on House of Jacob sisterhood activity for May and June 1981 highlights that Karen Bahar spoke on the difficult situation of Soviet Jewry at a meeting of the House of Jacob Synagogue, a sisterhood. While living in Winnipeg, Karen had been a member of the Group of 35, an international movement of women dedicated to freeing Soviet Jewry. And she encouraged those attending the meeting to participate in helping to free Soviet Jewry. In 1971, in response to Jewish humanitarian crises around the world, and especially in Israel, particularly challenged by the need to absorb the increasing flow of Soviet immigrants, Jewish communities in Canada and the US agreed to a moratorium on individual organizations' fundraisers. In Calgary, the annual Negev dinner was canceled, and the annual Histradrut campaign and the Pioneer Women's annual rescue campaign, child rescue campaign, were postponed. All Calgary organizations agreed to work together to raise $700,000 for the Calgary United Jewish Appeal campaign that year. An article in the April 1972 issue of the Calgary Jewish News entitled "Where Your UJA Dollar Goes" includes the statement that, quote, "To a Jew in Russia, it offers a hope of $1,500 to cover the cost of his exit visa, travel, and initial absorption costs," unquote. The Calgary efforts on behalf of Soviet Jews were primarily supported by the women of the community and can be categorized into three main areas: advocacy through petitions to the government of Canada and the Soviet Union, public awareness campaigns to the Jewish and general community, and support to the refuseniks through adoptions, phone calls, and letters. "Scream today or feel guilty tomorrow" was the headline in a 1978 issue of the Calgary Jewish News. Local women very involved in fighting for the rights of Soviet Jewry included Karen Bahar, Rena Cohen, Sophie Kettner, Faye Schwartz, and Gail Vigneault. Calgary-born Rena Cohen participated in the United Israel Appeal, precursor of UJA, mission in 1978. During that trip to Israel, she learned of the experience of refusenik Alexander Slepak, and this encouraged her to become active in the Soviet Jewry movement. Rena chaired the Calgary Committee for Soviet Jewry in the late 70s and early 80s. One of the projects Rena initiated was the inclusion of a greeting card for a refusenik in with the High Holiday Synagogue package, with the request that the Calgary family write a short message and then return the card and a donation to cover postage costs for double registration. The Beth Israel Synagogue participated in this, and 25 cards were sent. Reports of the activities of Hadassah's Public Affairs Committee note group letter writing events, one of which resulted in 39 letters. Similarly, the local Soviet Jewry Committee of the National Council of Jewish Women was very active in encouraging its members to write letters to refuseniks, providing a detailed guides as to the process. A number of groups selected one refusenik to support through correspondence and through petitions to political leaders. Sylvia Zalmanson, one of the leaders of the thwarted attempt to hijack a plane to freedom, was adopted by the Calgary Hadassah Wet'suwet'en in 1973. She was in the third year of her 10-year prison sentence at a labor camp and in ill health. Hadassah members sent letters and cables to the Kremlin and petitions such as this one to the Canadian government. In 1974, Sylvia was released from prison. Hadassah members also adopted Ida Nudell, actively advocating for her release through letters to the authorities. Ida was exiled in Siberia in 1978 for the crime of placing a banner from her apartment with the words, quote, "KGB, give me my visa to Israel," unquote. She was allowed to immigrate to Israel in 1987 and last month passed away at the age of 90. National Council of Jewish Women's Calgary section adopted Anna Zimmerman. Her son, daughter-in-law, and husband had been allowed to leave the Soviet Union, but she was refused due to state security issues. Sophie Kettner, a chair of the Calgary Committee for Soviet Jewry, an active Hadassah member, wrote passionately about the need to advocate on behalf of Soviet Jewry, and in a report on the Calgary Hadassah Wet'suwet'en's public affairs seminar held in 1973, noted, quote, "Our efforts on behalf of Soviet Jewry must be accelerated," unquote. A decade later, in 1984, the Aliyah chapter of Hadassah Wet'suwet'en adopted Anatoly Sharansky, sending letters to him. In 1986, the Oppressed Jewry Committee of Calgary Hillel and the Jewish Students Network, in coordination with their cohorts in other cities in Western Canada, sent telegrams to the Soviet embassy in Ottawa and the Prime Minister, highlighting the situation of arrested refusenik Vladimir Lifshitz. They asked that the Calgary Jewish community members join them in this campaign with their own letters to the Soviet embassy and the Prime Minister. Vladimir was charged with slandering the USSR as a result of comments about the life in the USSR included in letters written to his friends. His friends outside the Soviet Union. In March 1986, Vladimir was sentenced to 3 years in the Gulag, but pardoned after 1 year and allowed to leave in November 1987. These bracelets and necklaces were sold through community youth groups. Hal Jaffe told me that he wore his constantly, and when it broke, he purchased a replacement one. These stainless steel bracelets and necklaces were usually inscribed with the name of a refusenik, while the bracelet in the JHSSA collection includes the inscription, "Prisoner of Conscience, let my people go." Hal's replacement bracelet is inscribed, "I shall be vigilant until all my people are free." And I don't know if you can see my copy, courtesy of Larry and Deb Cates, that I'm wearing here tonight. Canadian children were encouraged to participate in the movement by twinning their bar and bat mitzvahs with children of refuseniks. Rena Cohen, in a 1981 report, notes that while local rabbis were supportive of this initiative, there was not a lot of interest from parents. Her son Jeff's 1980 bar mitzvah, twinned with Michael Kosharovsky, son of refusenik Yuli Kosharovsky from Moscow, was the first local bar mitzvah to be twinned. Michael's family had been refuseniks for 8 years. In 1984, at Temple B'nai Tikva, Scott Kaufman twinned his ceremony with Evgeny Kremlin, son of Michael and Galina Kremlin. Michael had been a refusenik since late 1973 and Galina since 1980. National Council of Jewish Women were very active in promoting the bar and bat mitzvah twinnings. A letter in the JHSSA National Council records indicates that at least 2 local girls expressed interest in twinning their bat mitzvahs. Events featuring phone calls to the refuseniks in the Soviet Union became ways to heighten public awareness and of the situation and to create personal connections. The calls also provided moral support for refuseniks. Calls were made from Calgary on a number of occasions during the 70s and 80s. It was not easy to make these calls. It required a reservation and the cooperation of the Soviet operator. Occasionally, or additionally, all calls were monitored by Soviet censors. The image in this slide is of Dr. Frankel speaking to refusenik Michael Lomonosov in 1983. The Calgary Jewish Star newspaper made a number of calls from their office and invited the public to participate in these conversations. At that time, it cost just under $10 to make a 3-minute call. An article in the Calgary Jewish Star on a 1984 call to Michael notes that the conversation, quote, was terminated unexpectedly and for unknown reasons, unquote. Michael was a mathematician in Moscow whose 1978 application to leave was reported as being rejected on the grounds that he might defame the USSR. 9 years later, in 1987, he was finally able to leave for Israel. And in 1987, Rabbi Heyman of the Congregation of House of Jacob collected funds to assist the Lomonosov family upon their arrival in Israel. Here's a taste of what these calls were like. This is a call to Michael Kremen in Moscow by Helen Dow, part of the Houston Action for Soviet Jewry in Texas. Michael is not home, but his son, Eugenie, answers the call. This is the same Eugenie that Scott Kaufman twinned his bar mitzvah with in 1984.
That's okay. We're gonna accept the call. Want it now? Is he on the phone? No, but I have the operator waiting. Okay, we'll take it now. Okay, operator, Moscow. It is. Moscow. Should I hang up and you'll call back? Yeah, okay. Okay, we'll do it that way. Thank you. Yes. Yes, I have Moscow on the line. Okay, that'll be fine. Okay, go ahead. Hello? Hello? Yes. What do you do? Galena? Oh, Michael? He is not home. Yes. Who is this? His son?
Yes, my name is Evgeny.
Oh, Evgeny. Hi. This is Helen Dow in Houston, Texas. We talked to your father last week, and we will be calling every week.
Okay.
How are you doing? Oh, how are you?
All right, so you get a taste of the challenges in making these calls. There were a number of rallies that took place in Calgary. The first rally I've identified is this November 1970 event promoting public awareness of the injustices faced by the Soviet Jews. It was initiated by young Judean Mark Brager. Community Relations Committee of Calgary Jewish Community Council gave its approval and pledged support to this rally, coordinated by the Calgary's Jewish Center's Teen and Youth Adult Planning Council. Held at Stephen Avenue Mall downtown, it attracted 200 people, according to the report in the Calgary Herald. Mark told me that he wanted to call this event a protest, but Community Council asked that he instead call it a rally. This protest was triggered by the Leningrad trial. In June 1970, 14 refuseniks and 2 non-Jewish dissidents devised a plan to seize a small aircraft and fly to freedom. These activists were willing to risk their lives in the hopes that even if the plan was unsuccessful, it would demonstrate to the world the desperate situation of the Jews in the Soviet Union. On the morning of the planned hijacking, the members of this group were all arrested. They were put on trial in Leningrad, and on December 24th, 1970, verdicts were announced. 2 were sentenced to death, and others were sent to labor camps for 8 to 15 years. Rallies and vigils were held across Canada, including in Calgary. And here we see the Jewish youth representing all the various youth groups coming together to protest. A large protest rally was held in January 1971 at Western Canada High School. The Calgary Jewish News reported that over 500 people attended, organized by Maurice Paperny and co-sponsored by the Jewish Community Council and the Calgary Council of Christians and Jews Western region. It featured a number of religious and political leaders, including Bishop O'Byrne and Major Rod Sykes. In 1971, when Premier Kosygin visited Canada, rallies were held across Canada. Kosygin did not visit Calgary, but members of the Calgary community went to Edmonton to join the rally there. 150 people in 40 vehicles met at the Beth Israel Synagogue at 5 a.m. on Sunday, October 14th, 1971, 50 years from yesterday, and caravan to Edmonton to join with the members of the Edmonton community to protest the treatment of Soviet Jewry. The group gathered in a field along the highway just outside Fort Saskatchewan to wave signs as Kosygin sped past on his way to and from a short visit to a nickel refining plant. The protesters then joined a rally of about 500 individuals at a synagogue in Edmonton. In 1975, Sophie Kettner organized a rally which featured an address by a recent Jewish immigrant from the Soviet Union. According to the Herald, the rally was chaired by Jeff Eichler and also involved Mark Friedman, Rena Groner, Terry Faber, and Karen Promisel. A rally held in the summer of 1978, organized by Elliot Cohn, a chair of the Calgary Committee for Soviet Jewry, collected 1,000 signatures on a petition asking the Soviet Union to abide by the Helsinki Accords. These accords, signed by 35 nations, including the Soviet Union, supported the guarantee of human rights. With Simchat Torah being the one time when Jews in Russia were permitted to celebrate as Jews in the 70s and 80s, Jews around the world held Simchat Torah rallies to support their brethren in the Soviet Union. In Calgary, a number of Simchat Torah rallies were held. This image is of a 1979 event to raise public awareness of the situation of refuseniks, such as the Slepak family, through a walk. This is a photograph of Rabbi Ginsburg, Cantor Fred Mannis, Cantor Morris Lang, Mayor Ralph Klein, Soviet Jewry activists Rena Cohn and Karen Bahar, and recent Soviet immigrant Ishmael Plastik at a 1982 Hanukkah rally. This rally and candle lighting ceremony was held on the steps of City Hall and attended by about 75 people. Mayor Ralph Klein signed a petition requesting human rights for Soviet Jews and noted his personal support for this cause. One very effective tactic to raise public awareness was to set up demonstrations at events featuring the Soviets. 1974 appears to have been a year of considerable opportunity for this. Approximately 30 members of the Jewish community, primarily high school students, distributed pamphlets detailing how Soviet Jews are denied the right to leave Russia to people arriving at the Stampede Corral for a June 1974 event featuring Russian gymnasts. This protest was organized by the Calgary Committee for Soviet Jewry. That same year, Calgary Hadassah Witzo organized a demonstration outside the Calgary performance of the Bolshoi Ballet, and 3 years later, in 1977, members conducted a boycott of the Moscow Circus, dressing in black and passing out pamphlets. In May 1974, my late father, Harry Sherman of blessed memory, and my sister Barb flew from Calgary to join a United Synagogue youth protest at the Spokane World's Fair. That same month, 10 grade 9 Calgary Hebrew School students and their 3 chaperones drove to Spokane, where they spent 2 days at Expo 74. They spent their first day wearing their Free Soviet Jewry t-shirts at the Soviet Pavilion and distributing pamphlets to fairgoers. One side of the pamphlet had a map of Expo, and the other side highlighted how Soviet Jews are denied freedom to leave the Soviet Union. A number of former refuseniks and family members of refuseniks spoke to the Calgary Jewish and broader community in order to generate support. In 1975, recently released refusenik Alexander Goldfarb spoke at campuses across Canada, including Calgary. In 1978, the Bootman family was in Calgary mobilizing support for Hillel Bootman, an engineer who had been sentenced to 10 years for his role in the 1970 plot to hijack the plane to fly to freedom. In February 1973, the National Action Campaign Committee for Soviet Jewry sponsored Mrs. Esther Markish on a speaking tour. In Calgary, 150 people heard her talk about her life as a refusenik. Her husband, Peretz Markish, was a Yiddish poet who was among the over 400 Jewish writers killed during Stalin's leadership. A decade later, in 1983, B'nai B'rith League for Human Rights Calgary chapter and the local Jewish newspaper, The Jewish Star, sponsored a program to encourage the community to lobby on behalf of Soviet Jewry. Speakers included Dr. Jim Jones from the University of Calgary, who the Jewish Star noted, quote, is interested in and has closely followed the refusenik movement, unquote. I recently emailed with Dr. Jones and was amazed to hear that he had spent a decade in the Soviet Union, during which time he became friends with the refuseniks and attended the Simchat Torah celebrations and even bumped into Elie Wiesel on the streets of Moscow and was introduced to Wiesel by his refuseniks friends. In 1986, 30 university students caravanned across Canada, holding 2 weeks of protests on behalf of Soviet Jewry in 16 cities. Among the 30 students was Calgarian Ilana Krieger-Lapidus, who had just completed her first year at the University of Calgary. She joined the caravan in Winnipeg and traveled with the group to Vancouver. On May 23, 1986, the group held a rally at Calgary City Hall where, dressed in striped prisoner uniforms, they symbolically staged a burial for the Soviets' anti-Jewish practices. At the rally, Mojo Williams, president of the Alberta Association for the Advancement of Colored People, encouraged the students to continue their protests and petitions as effective means to apply international pressure on the Soviet government to end discrimination against Soviet Jews. From the rally, the students visited the Jewish day schools and then spent the weekend in Calgary attending Shabbat services and educational seminars with over 150 members of the Calgary Jewish community. As the caravan departed Calgary, the community began a walkathon dedicated to the assistance of oppressed Jewry. I already mentioned the grade 9 trip from the Calgary Hebrew School, now called the Calgary Jewish Academy, to protest at the 1974 World's Fair. But a year before, in 1973, the Hebrew School held a number of activities to educate their students about the plight of Soviet Jews. Student Council also sold Prisoner of Conscience chains, and the junior high was a member of the group Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry. The Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry was founded in 1964 by college students in the United States. In addition to the rallies and other group activities, a number of Jewish Calgarians took it upon themselves to individually advocate for Soviet Jewry. Just before Passover 1986, 2 grade 12 students, Sandra Mogeli and Megan Zivitz, mailed matzah boxes to the Soviet embassy in Ottawa with a note requesting that the matzah be distributed to Soviet Jews who do not have the right to celebrate Passover, and they advocated for the release of 25 refuseniks. In the fall of 1981, at a cantorial concert with cantors Nathan Lamb and cantor Fareed Darshadi, Calgary cantor Morris Lang joined the guest cantors for a song dedicated to the Parisky family. On November 11th, 1981, Alexander Paritsky, was charged with slandering the Soviet state as a result of his 1976 application to leave the Soviet Union and given a 3-year sentence. As noted before, support for Soviet Jewry also came from politicians and clergy and others outside the Jewish community. At the September 1984 Calgary meeting of the 11th International Congress for Tropical Medicine and Malaria, papers by 2 Refusnik scientists, Dr. Goldfarb and Dr. Uspensky, were presented in absentia. Dismissed from their positions, these 2 respected scientists also sent brief recorded messages to the meeting. Over 230 participants from 36 countries were signatories on petitions requesting that the president of the Academy of Medical Sciences of the USSR help grant these scientists and their families exit visas so that they can continue with their careers. Also in 1984, the Calgary chapter of the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem sponsored a talk at Emmanuel Church by Jay and Mary Del Rawling about their project to create a film highlighting the plight of Soviet Jewry through interviews with refuseniks. While the interviews had been filmed in secret during a 1984 visit to Russia, the KGB had somehow gotten wind of the project and seized the film footage. Fortunately, the Rawlings had hidden a second copy, and the filmmakers were later able to get it smuggled out of the Soviet Union and use it to make the film Gates of Brass, released in Canada in 1985. You can view this film on YouTube. Oops. The success of these rallies, demonstrations, phone calls, petitions, letter writing campaigns, etc., in bringing this issue to the attention of all Calgarians is reflected in the significant number of articles in the Calgary Herald on Soviet Jewry during the 70s and 80s. Within the Jewish community, readers of the Calgary Jewish News and the Calgary Jewish Star would have noted many articles on Soviet Jewry, especially between 1971 and 1987. From the late 1980s, with the change in Soviet immigration policy and following the dissolution of the Soviet Union on December 25, 1991, the widespread oppression of Jewish religion and culture ended, and the gates of the country were flung open for free immigration. With the modern day exodus, our local community has welcomed hundreds of Jews from the former Soviet Union. For almost 20 years, a number of Calgarians, both Jewish and non-Jewish, devoted much time and effort to the social action campaign to free Soviet Jewry. 50 years later, we salute all those who work so hard on the local front in this important social justice initiative. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to everyone who made the creation of this presentation possible. I appreciate especially all those who have shared their stories, their photos, and those institutions who have given me permission to reproduce the material in this PowerPoint. Thank you.